Welcome to the Digible Dudes podcast. I'm David.
I'm Reid.
And Reid, while it's fresh, as you were just saying off the air, we just finished the 2021 AIM shoot.
Reconnect.
I don't know. Reconnect. Okay, I was gonna say Dennis screwed up the naming of the different three AIM events, so I feel like it's okay that I didn't remember Reconnect. So we finished the first one, the Reconnect event, and we figured we'd do a recap, our thoughts, what we learned, and whatever, just shoot the shiz over how the event went and what our experience was like. So where do you want to start? Do you want to start from the keynote, or do you want to start from like expectations going in?
Well, I want this to mainly stay positive, and so starting with the keynote probably isn't a good idea. And I'll say with apologies to Yardi, Rent Cafe. I mean, they're now, I mean, we're trying, and we are working with them, but obviously we have the backstory of the first AIM event and me getting my hand slapped for a little dig at Yardi. So I'm going to try and be nice here on the podcast. But I thought just surfacing the themes, I guess, made a lot of sense. That would get us into it, like what were the overarching kind of topics and where were we seeing the most engagement, that kind of stuff. And then that can just lead us down, path of conversation.
Yeah. Well, first off, this one, I wasn't sure. I had thought there was going to be more like content, like the keynote, and less of the vendor roundtables. But obviously, as we got into the event, it really launched with the keynote, and then after that, it was always like quick networking session, then break up into like 4 different vendor roundtables, and those vendors could do presentations of their own, or they could just have conversations with people. And I would say, like, for one, I would have expected more vendors to just be doing hard pitching, because I don't remember being told you couldn't as a vendor. But I was really pleased with the ecosystem where it's like not every vendor decided that they just wanted to like do a sales pitch, and they really tried to be more collaborative. And in fact, I joined a couple roundtables where I had to actually jump into the session and say, hey, could you just soft pitch Dwellsy for me real quick? Like, I want to give you an opportunity to tell us what the heck you guys do and what you are and what makes you different, because people were really kind of shying away from trying to beat their chest about what they do and what they solve. So I thought that was really cool from a cultural standpoint, from the vendor aspect.
Yeah, me too. And we've taken that approach and, with our own summit, and it's gone really well. And I mean, it doesn't seem
You're taking credit for the for the culture, I see.
Of course I am. Well, it just doesn't seem like a revolutionary idea, right? It's like people don't like typically those product pitches, just bloated expo like type events. That being said, I do think it's important to hear about those differentiators, who these folks are, and some of the new tech that's emerging. And I think that probably did happen in some of the speed dating or networking, where it was like, okay, now is a chance for me to really talk to you about us. But yeah, I like the direction that it went. I think I saw on one of yours, where you were posting some classic David questions. They were like, why don't you just come in? And you're like, well, I'm a vendor. And they're like, it doesn't matter. We're just looking for good dialogue. So I think that probably started with the first few sessions. And people just kind of fed off that. I might be wrong, but I mean, people were obviously going in and out, seeing how people were talking. I think people understood, hey, part of this whole reconnect thing is just dialogue. It's not hard pitches. So yeah, I thought that was refreshing. I picked up on that too.
Yeah. As far as other themes, I'll say like the conversations to me weren't that different from prior years. So I know you and I have been, maybe we came across critical before, but it's like every year we've only been going to these events like 5 years or so, these types of events, not just AIM, but and it seems like it's always the same conversation circling, and with just a little bit new information, added flavor, but it's really the same stuff. So right, like multi-touch attribution and whatever, like big data, AI, like lead
Smart
handling.
technology. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah. And that said, like now we've put on some of our own events, and I could understand how we haven't yet struggled for material, but I could understand how, if you're always asking for people to come on, and the people that you're having come on are often paying for the the opportunity, how it would be hard to control that content and force them to be like, you gotta give me something new, give me something new. And so, but what I was going to say is I was really surprised by how active the chat was in each of these roundtables I joined. And there were some people where somebody would be talking about something where I'm like, well, this conversation's been had for 4 or 5 years. And they'd be like, oh my gosh, that's such a great point. Loving this dialogue, whatever, whatever. And I'm like, okay, well, I just got to remind myself that not everybody has as many feed in as we do, and or the vendors might have on some of these topics, because I've heard it from other vendors too, that they get sort of annoyed with some of that, the same conversations happening, and some of the audience members really still need and enjoy some of these conversations that we've been having for a few years. So that surprised me, and I guess in a way like was good to reset my perspective on it.
Yeah, it surprised me, half of me in a good way, half of me in a bad way, which is probably what you're saying too. Like, it was good to see the engagement, the chat light up, and people feeding off of each other. But what wasn't as I guess good was that it did feel like it was just recycling a lot of the same conversations that have been going on for a few years now. I mean, there's a certain reality to that AIM and ourselves included have to face, and that. And we're early, so it's easier for us, as you said, to come up with, like, I guess, fresh content. But at the end of the day, if you're staying within one vertical, meaning multifamily, and then you're a vertical inside of that, like the event is focused on marketing, then you're going to be talking about attribution, you're going to be talking about content, creative, on site, etc. I mean, there's definitely a lot of, I'll say, pillars or whatever that to work with. And I do think we can probably do better as an industry to make it more interesting, or find some more contrarian, as you like to bring up, like, points. But I'm somewhat settling with the fact that we're going to be talking about attribution for the next several years. We're going to be talking about smart technology. We're going to be talking about demographics, like what they want, what they don't want. Surveys that have come out, the latest ILS. Where to spend money, that kind of stuff. So it's really incumbent on us, not meaning just the two of us, but, for, I hope, thought leaders, relative newcomers, to try and produce a different slant, make things more interesting, make people really think. And I love the fact, and we haven't done this on all of our podcasts when we interview people, but you like to ask that contrarian, give me a hot take. And I think that that's something that would be really nice for them to integrate into these events. That would have been nice, to hear some of the bigger players, talking about, what they feel is wrong, or, something that is definitely going against the grain. Cause I didn't catch that as much.
Well, what's also interesting is like in all of these like leadership books that we read and discuss, they always talk about like you just got to get used to repetition. Like even at your own company, you got to say the same thing 6 times.
Yeah, I
And so
totally agree. Yeah.
in ways as it's hard to say it, but like in ways like each of the vendors are leaders in the industry, right? Because they're offering a service that lots of people are buying. So in a leader in a different capacity, you just got to get used to saying the same thing over and over. And the trick has been for me internally is like we got to believe in what we're reiterating, but also then you got to find ways to keep yourself interested, or have fun yourself with the message. So you're saying the same message just in different ways that will connect to different people. And I can only imagine what like the boss, the
Steve?
musician?
Oh,
No, no,
Bruce
no.
Springsteen?
Yeah, it's Springsteen. If you're singing "Born in the USA" again, like how much you must be like, gosh dang it, I've sung this song 100,000 times. So it's like these different artists like Dave Matthews that like every time you hear the song it's different, and I feel like it's just got to be because it's like I got to keep myself entertained here, man. I can't do the same. Um, Katy Perry like note for note every time I
Totally.
go out there.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, good comparison to musicians, of course. Easier to sing "Born in the USA" a million times when you're making, 50 million off of it. But I I I remember when I was, we'll say, middle of my management career, and maybe I'm still in the middle, like if I do this for another 20 years, but I'll just say I was about 5 to 7 years in, and I was in Austin, and I literally said, and I think I only did this once, But I was so tired of saying the same thing to the department, that I just stopped, and you can imagine this, you know me obviously as well as anybody. I just stopped and I said, "I am so sick of hearing my voice saying the same shit to you guys. I just can't do it." I just stopped, and I was like, I'm just done, like, I'm not gonna talk about this anymore." And, of course, I got pulled in by my VP, it's like, "You can't, that's not good form, Reid." I was like, I don't know how many more times I can say this, and it didn't mean that they weren't, I guess, executing or whatever, but it just killed me, and I still feel that way, and it's funny because 'cause I'm telling our young management team, I was like, "Get ready for repetition. It's gonna drive you nuts, but you just have to keep hitting it." And so when we do have, like, an AIM event, we're starting to hear the same people say the same stuff, and that is, but I applaud that they're trying to do it with passion and energy and all that stuff. That's what you gotta bring to the table. But ultimately, again, back to, like, our responsibility and, like, great leadership and thought leadership doesn't doesn't just leave it there, right? The boss didn't just sing one song and he was done. He kept going, and that's what we need people to do here is, like, let's build off of each other, not just keep repeating the same stuff over and over. But,
Well,
let me say before, again, back to positive here. I did not think it was, a bad event. There was things that I wish they would have done more, and we're already obviously touching on some of that, but, um, the engagement you mentioned was good to see, and the hop-in surprised me. I told you that right afterwards. I was like, "Maybe we should look at this again for when we do our summit." But I thought it actually went pretty well, with the 6 to 9 people or whatever that would jump in, and then, the chat and the scheduling, I thought it flowed pretty well. So I want to give a shout out to Dennis and team for a pretty smooth event.
yeah, and I feel like Hopin was working better than last year when we did the summit and we tested it because there were a lot of audio issues with it because it's built on Google's Google Meet technology and just not as strong as like the Zoom tech. But there were some audio issues in some, but I felt like people handled it well. Like the chat would be like, "Hey, I'm getting feedback. Could you mute yourself?" And it didn't seem like it became like super uncomfortable because it I guess like back to like a again applause for AIM and the industry, but just like there's a good enough friendly enough culture with the way that they went about it. And I did feel like with the reconnect it actually did feel like we were more connected than at the regular AIM. I feel like at the normal AIM you're in person and there's a little bit of posturing that goes on and everyone's worried about what they're wearing and like how they appear and blah blah blah. And I told you afterwards, like having that chat was like to me now like invaluable. It's like I don't want to go to an event where I don't have the option to chat because sometimes you attend these sessions and you're like, is everyone bored here or do they like this or whatnot? And being able to see people react and ask questions and see that they were into it helped me be like, okay, I need to be into this too, right? So I just hope that even as AIM goes back in person this year, they have an actual like chat option even while you're there in person.
And they do and they don't. Like, they do have that AIM, app, and
Hmm.
I did see that was where we first started, kinda communicating with Bigos. Remember Tanya and David
Yeah.
Kinehart were pretty active on that chat. But it wasn't what I know, I'm acknowledging here, it's not what you're describing. I think it'd be pretty, and I'll use the word ballsy here, to require, a chat like in like all presentations at AIM. So I told you when you mentioned that to me, I was like, "Hey, for our roundups, should we just have it on Zoom?" And that's what we're
Yep.
projecting. So it's the deck, but allows people, unfortunately, it's not ideal because that's, people are, as you said, heads down now on their phones, like trying to chat versus the benefit of having a laptop. But I still think it's cool. I still think it's worth doing, because people actually can see in the main event, right? Like
Yep.
what your feelings are. I'd love that. I'd love to see they should just have like a roll either
Yep.
up on the presentations or a big roll up chat board.
Yep.
It'd be a great component.
Even outside the session. So, well, so you're right, they did have the app. It didn't feel like the hive mind culture was like, "Hey, we can use this like Tanya and David were, like to chat about each session." But I think maybe now this pandemic would have helped push us all forward in that way. And then if you do have it up on a monitor, it's helping reinforce, like, we want you guys to show your activity and be here. And I'll just say I'm going to be more likely to jump in and add stuff now than I was than I would have been in the past. So hopefully that carries on. All right. Well, do you have any
Let's
other
talk about
themes? Okay.
no. I don't think so because again, the content, as you said, and I agree with that. I wish there was more homegrown, if you will, like that they brought in. Getting back to the keynote, that was just, Yardy's, VP or whatever, and she's nice, she's great, but she's just kind of pontificating about, the space right now, versus what they had when we were in person with the guy that was talking about the cobot or whatever, an AI, like,
Right.
and I know you have to, I mean, they can't necessarily, and why would they bring in their heaviest hitters? So I'm hoping they obviously do something like that for the in person, but I wish that there was more of that. Um, but the sessions themselves were the same type of content blocks, if you will, that we're used to. So we already covered that, but how do you get away from that? Attribution, again, smart technology, all that stuff. So I think it's worth at this point, unless you have more to add, like, let's just talk about some of the sessions.
Yeah, well, to then start with the keynote session, I was though impressed by whoever the fellow was presented with the VP, like his audio video setup. I'm like, does this? I don't know if this is what this guy does for Yardy, where it's like he's got his home studio, but he had like the light strips along his shelving, and just he had like the fisheye lens, and I was just like, he is way more. I mean, if you would have put you and me up there, we would have been there in our like ratty t-shirts and been like, so good morning. Anybody have their coffee yet? And this guy was like effing on. And so I think he did a great job, like trying to bring the energy, super animated, had a great setup. Made me a bit jealous that like we need to get our setups a little bit better. But
Well, I have to stop you there. I had the exact opposite experience of that guy. I wanted to strangle him through the my laptop. I couldn't believe how, for me, how
too
obnoxious,
much
and
over. Yeah.
he was just the nerdiest. Like, and I got what they were trying to do. It just did not work for me. I was like, I knew he was a pro. I mean, they hired somebody that has that skill.
Yeah.
And you're not probably far off from how we would have approached it, but I think we would have brought a little more passion. I'm going to give us a little more credit than that. But we're not pros, and we've hired a pro last year, and we know how that does make a difference and how good they can really be. So I give them credit for the effort, but the whole character of that guy just made me like, I could not sit through it. I was like,
Yeah.
F this, man. And I walked away.
Well, it's one of those things though where it's like it's either going to work or not work for certain people. So you're always going to have that divisiveness. I started AIM in bed from the second COVID shot. So maybe maybe I needed some pumping up.
I guess
Uh,
so. I feel like it would have been worse, man, if I
yeah.
had felt like total, what, and then
Yeah.
had him in my face. Oh my god.
Yeah. Well, I was glad it wasn't just a regular like two people on Zoom is my main thing there.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
then
I hear you.
going into the sessions, like I was really impressed with BetterBot, and I think like BetterBot may have taken the cake for the amount of attendees that they had in their session. I think they may have been the first session, and they had more than I saw in any of the breakouts since. So Robert has to be thrilled with that.
He does, and I don't hate saying this. I merely don't know. But was this because the content or the other suppliers, that were their sessions were just not at all what people wanted to talk about, versus BetterBot was that interesting or engaging and exciting? It's
Yeah.
probably somewhere in the middle, and obviously our good friend, Jen over there at Pinwheel was one of them. And not to call it out or anything, because I've obviously always enjoyed conversations with her, and self-guided tours I still think are very important and emerging kind of topic, right? Like, it hasn't caught full fire yet, like with the industry. So I'm just saying, like, I was surprised that her session didn't garner more attention. And then, yeah, I mean, just to back you up on that point, BetterBot did, I think, for the whole AIM, like, probably had the highest numbers as far as attendees, especially knowing that they were up against three others, because somebody else, I think, had 90s, low or upper 80s, but there was
Mhm.
only 3 to choose from. So shout out to them. Yeah, Robert definitely had to be happy. And I thought that was a good example, though, right out of the gate, like you were saying at the top of this podcast, is that Trevor, I think his name's Trevor Park,
Mhm.
he did a really nice job of just making it kind of more of a open-ended, conversation. It wasn't at all a hard pitch on BetterBot.
Yeah, Trevor. I'm pretty friendly with Trevor, and he BetterBot's lucky to have gotten him like I don't know 4 or 5 months ago, but he was also on top of all the follow up, which we fall down on constantly. I saw a bunch of LinkedIn posts from him with like screenshots and stuff, and it's like I was lucky I made it through our session. So we need our own version of Trevor to handle this.
I was
Like
counting
after.
on Erica probably more than I should have. And I don't mean that as a dig at Erica, but like, I just remember she was like, yeah, I'll do some social posts and stuff. And I was like, cool, we're covered,
Yeah. Well, the
like me
problem
and
is we didn't
David.
give her a ticket.
Yeah, that
That's probably the
I
first issue.
yeah, I did not know that. That explains a lot. Because I was looking on it in LinkedIn. I was like, I don't see anything really. But yeah, that would have been a good idea.
Yeah.
Poor Erica.
Next,
We love
next
you,
time.
Erica. You know that if you're listening.
Yeah. Next time, let's not make that flub. All right. So yeah, I didn't say I was in Jennifer's session more than BetterBot, but I was impressed with theirs. How did you feel our session went? Like, I know we thought that we were going to go in when I thought that people would be forced to join our table. And then it wasn't until afterwards that I learned that like, no, this is like a totally volunteer thing. And my, I don't know, fear, I guess, that no one's ever going to want to engage with anything we ever do. And so we pulled an audible like 20 minutes before. And we're like, you know what? Let's not even ask and not have people join. We'll just kind of do what we do and make it a live podcast. But yeah, how did you feel about it?
Yeah, it's a super funny phobia or some sort of complex you have. And you cracked me up. I think you said it yesterday that you don't remember, but maybe first grade you had a birthday party and nobody showed up.
Yeah.
Because there's definitely something there. And more often than not, I think you end up pleasantly surprised with the level of engagement or attendees that we get.
Yeah.
And so for me, yeah, I thought it went well. I was not disappointed because we didn't really invite anybody in, but I was hoping that we might get, a couple brave souls to join us so that it wasn't more or less what this is, which is another podcast from Reid and David. But I thought you did a great job. I'm not just saying that, you always do, but I thought you brought some good points to the table and, made it informative, but also, managed to make it somewhat interactive and, well, made sure the tool was part of it. Cause I do think, especially for us, what we're doing here with fair housing is totally new. And so it was important, even though we don't want to make a sales pitch, that we did show something. And so I thought that was helpful. But I always, of course, I always enjoy shooting the shiz, as you say, together about different topics. And so that's what I felt. I felt we just started getting our groove, and obviously some people there at the end seemed happy with it, and we were able to hold on to the 44. I think that was the number we got up to, 44, 45, and it stayed there pretty much throughout. So I was almost, well, shocked is a strong word, but I was like, we'll get up to whatever, we'll plateau, and then we'll start seeing them fall off. But
Yeah.
everybody stayed on, so that was good.
Yeah, I thought it went better than I would have expected because I think there were like 200 and something people that joined the event. So, and you have to imagine that people have other things on their schedule too that they had to duck in and out on, just like us. So, with 3 other sessions besides ours at the time, I felt like that's a pretty good representation. And I was glad because it's not. We've heard from many people that it's not a big concern from them when it comes to marketing and fair housing. They're like, I know it exists, but it's just not something that people push me on often, so I don't have to pay much mind to it. So I was pleased in that way because I just would have figured if it's not a hot topic for them, why join the session? And yet I still feel like it was getting above 40 felt like that means that some people they're listening. So that's good.
Yeah. One thing I wish we could have done, and I obviously alluded to the research that we've already conducted on the fair housing, like from the marketer's perspective, but it'd be nice if there was a single survey that did go out in advance that allowed it would be obnoxious, right, if it was 200 questions long, but just to get at to help tee up some of this stuff, I think would be valuable. Where it's like, hey, you know, you may have remembered taking the survey before the Reconnect Summit or whatever, and here was some of the feedback as far as what people were most interested in or where they had, but allow especially those 6 pavilion sponsors like us, not to be selfish here, but maybe to have a little bit more real estate or a few more questions so that it better tees up some of those sessions where it's like we could actually point to that. It's just a thought.
Yeah. Well, then you're getting the crowd to sort of vote on what they find interesting, right? Like
Right.
you're pulling it together, and you don't have to totally abide by it. But then if you're Dennis or Steve, you could say, "Hey, there's a lot of interest or emerging interest in this thing, and we don't have somebody." And you could then go to your sponsors and say, "Hey, who can pull something good together for this?" It's kind of like
And
TED Talks. Like they super produce it and make sure that they see your content ahead of time, that it's a topic that people will find interesting. I mean, it's a lot of work to do something like that, but they're
yeah.
successful.
Well, and it lets you also kind of get into that contrarian stuff, right? Where it's like the majority of people said this. Does anybody out there disagree, or feel like, we're not
Mm.
talking about, as you've said this also before, but we're not talking about some things that we should be. And I think that's ultimately what we were trying to say. We didn't explicitly say it, but with fair housing is, yeah, you guys haven't been super concerned or focused on this, but actually you probably should be. And not meaning that it should consume 90% of their thoughts, but it's like this is something that is bubbling up, and really needs to be more of a focal point at events like this.
Yeah. Well, as far as some of the other sessions that seemed really that had a lot of engagement, one was the apartment geofencing.com group. Um,
Stunning.
he got a lot. He got a lot of action, which we met him when he launched the company 2 years ago. He had his booth next to us at Optech, and I felt bad for him. I remember like, I'm sorry that your booth got stuck next to our booth because well, it just felt like if I was him, I wouldn't have wanted to be next to us. Not that it was like there is something about picking a niche, and he's picking a niche within a niche, right? But I just felt rough because obviously, like Fiona was just getting taken to the world at that point, and it included geofencing recommendations and stuff. So, um, hard for him to grab attention from folks. But he seems to be having a lot of success right now. Like he talked about having 500 campaigns and 60 management companies that he works with, and it looks like they've moved into over the top TVs and more like Hulu advertisements and things like that. So it's beyond geofencing, which is always the problem when you pick a name so specific, apartment geofencing, to then it's like apartment SEO, right? Like they've branched out, but it's like their apartment SEO, and people don't think that they're good at the other stuff because their name's apartment SEO, and that's a challenge for them to overcome. But it's had some cool stuff happening with OTT and connected TV, just like such as being able to report back on walk-ins from people that have seen one of your ads. I thought that was unique and novel, and not something I'd seen in the OTT TV category before. And people seemed really interested. So
Yeah. Well, I'll say I did like that guy. If someday he ever hears this, like I feel like such a jerk right now, like in this whole podcast. I really love this industry. I love the people in the industry. So I don't want to come off the wrong way, but I'm stunned that business still exists. When he was by us, and the sales guy he was like came from the restaurant industry. He didn't know anything about digital marketing or whatever. He was super sweet, super nice guy. I think he's already moved on, but I remember coming to you and I was like, that you're not going to see that booth, like and so it is fascinating. And maybe the OTT is, I don't know how big of a part of his growth that is, but it truly shocks me that a linear geofencing company could make it at this point. But then again, I guess it doesn't. So let me move on from that and ask what is the spin? What is the you mentioned the walk-in. I'd be curious how they do that without infringing on like the PII, like, how they connect that back. So that's one question. I don't know if that was answered in the session. And then I personally still, it's not that I'm a skeptic. I know people obviously are streaming and that I see the ads myself almost every night. I rarely, if ever, see a local ad. So I'm still curious about that because we sold some of that. You and I did before we left and started Digible. And all I see is the same Allen Iverson commercial about like some betting platform, that he started 85 times every night. So that's a separate thing in itself. But yeah, talk to me more like how did you gather how that's being done without again violating any kind of PII laws? And then how much are you believing in OTT as a viable solution to upper funnel like branding for multifamily, given the budgets they have? Like that's the other thing I'm curious about because when we were working with it, there were some pretty significant spend requirements.
Well, I think technology's changed a lot, right? Like Trade Desk has gone heavy into this category, and I think they use Simplify as their back end. If I remember talking to him before about it, and so I don't know what Simplify's offering is with CTV, but I would say like tech has improved. Where even with DV360, you can start to run some of this stuff, and so like if you then run video content through DV360, there are some ways that you can go back and do walk-ins. And so for us, like we've been testing, we haven't publicized it to any clients, but we've been testing a walk-in product, a walk-in technology that will work across all things. So we've tested it with social and display, and the numbers look really good and encouraging. We have to decide how we want to monetize it, if we want to like eat the cost or not. But it so far the efficacy looks strong. Who knows what will happen with his solution as like Cookie Geddon strikes, and some of the iOS updates and stuff. I will say this though, like he brought the price point in at, I think he said like $350 is what he was showing is like what his minimum was to get started. So he's really brought the price point down, and so I think that's a very approachable price, and it seems similar to what we do with Spotify, right? Like we weren't sure if Spotify would work for apartments, but because Spotify has so few local ads, you really stand out when you are a local ad and you're targeted, and you can really kind of dominate. So I think it's interesting and would be worth us testing, ourselves, but because we could start to track walk-ins that way. Our biggest issue has been video content, and he said the same thing. The hardest thing is the video content. So they offer some packaging with some creative services where they can make a montage for you and stuff. So if we built the right templates and stuff, and we're willing to do the creative, I think it would be worth testing. Similar to like we don't do much YouTube because people don't have the content, but we could definitely build it. So I think you could stand out for apartments if you were doing it because nobody else is doing it, and because now some of that CTV is approachable in different forms. You could make it where they don't need what we saw before, a $20,000 buy. But yeah, I mean, it wouldn't be my first choice, for my funnel. Like I feel like obviously like there's other staples, but I think it's worth testing, and certainly for like lease up luxury properties, I'd be curious to see how it performs, just like some of the audio content we've done.
Yeah. Well, I'd be really curious to see a share of voice on that, like $350, because at the end of the day, it's still, speaking of repetition, but, when you're reaching them, how you're reaching them, and how often. And so that I'd have real doubts about that. And then I'd question, I mean, I'm not trying to be Captain Skeptic here, but how reliable is the walk-in attribution? Not meaning that person didn't walk in, but should we take this as a transition or segue to MTA? But it's
Yeah.
like, yeah.
Well, I gotta say, so for two things real quick. One, I totally agree with you. CTV technology has not been super clean and trustworthy on the data. So that is one thing I'd look skeptically at if I'm a customer. Two, geofencing and walk-in technology is something you also always have to be super skeptical with. So we just try to be super tight as we vet that. I mean, you were talking about how we're now rolling out basically clinical trials for our own technology to say like, all right, search is now it's through the A trial, right? But maybe Spotify is in the C trial phase, right? Same thing with this. This is like a C trial phase to me because you just can't trust the data from both of those platforms without being super particular. Also, real quick, I think one reason he survived, and kudos to him, but he's been able to remain super lean. Like if I remember when I don't think he would mind saying this, but he's just been able to remain super lean, where it's like they have like 3 employees. That I got from LinkedIn, so I know that's public. And then if you're using Simplify can actually manage the campaigns for you, so you don't have to then manage your own campaigns. And the reason you would go through him instead of direct to Simplify is because they have minimums of 20 grand a month. So he had to get a certain amount of scale to be able to use them, so that their managed service would take over. And so it's not necessarily a bad option for people, but I think we need more companies like this. I support like more small entrepreneurs coming into the space, so it's not just like the big players trying to offer these things, and they usually, the conversation sort of sounds the same, and they just sort of propaganda basically. So I'm glad he's made it through.
Yeah, and this isn't me trying to take my foot or whatever back out of my mouth. I also support, the entrepreneurs. How could I not? So welcome, as I say, welcome one, welcome all. Like if you can compete with, a linear geofencing, I mean, that's frankly more impressive than what we've done, in a way. So good for him. And if he brings OTT to multifamily, I'll really, I will get down and kiss the dude's feet next time.
You should give the background that you were tasked with like Operation 2020 back at the Post, where you had to bring TV
video
or whatever video, to like local newspapers, and I don't think you chose that mission, and it was unfortunate.
I got stigmatized, like all the way back from when I was in at Cox, all the way back to when I was at CBS in Seattle, man. I was the video guy, and I don't know. I mean, I do and I don't know how that happened, but it just always stuck with me. And you've done that to me. You haven't helped my stigma, because you're like, you're always about video.
I know. I love poking you on it.
Yeah, and it just so yeah, well, no, you weren't stuck with me on that. I forget who my partner was. You obviously handled Magellan with Brian, but
Cook? Was it not Cook?
Oh no, I couldn't have.
I thought he went.
No, I think it may have been. No, it couldn't have been. No, that's all I can say. But I don't think I would have been able to. Well, I don't know. I'll stop. Today's not been good for me. I think I'm gonna be writing some apology notes like when we're done with this podcast. But well, I don't even know where we're going anymore.
MTA. Hit MTA before we wrap, and we can pick up anything else if we want to next time, because I got to jump on another call. So hit me with MTA.
Well, you're just gonna make this like Reid's negative podcast. I mean, I
love it because you're like, we got to do these in the morning because I'm fresher and I'm more on, and it's like, well, maybe you're just more grumpy.
Yeah, maybe so. Well, so that got brought up. Well, that's part of, I don't want to say the problem, but that's not probably what they were hoping for. Is I just came away like MTA and not whoever the vendor was. Who hosted that one?
I know there was Anyone Home did something there.
That's it. Good job. Okay. That was it. That was Anyone Home. I didn't catch the first half of it. And I don't fault them, I guess, for getting into it, because obviously, every marketer, every operator is asking about this. And so it lit up the chat board for sure, where everybody was talking about the different methods that they, have approached. And this may sound random, but I remember actually last year, I think, and I don't even know how it came up, but Joya from RKW, one of our most beloved clients, she has an amazing, but it's a spreadsheet, and it's not the only thing. Obviously, they work with us, and we do everything we can to help deliver. Like, where did they come from? Did they convert? All that jazz. But it just made me think, about all the different methods that are out there, and some are more manual spreadsheets, and others, of course, are now taking more of a leap, you could say, with some of the MTA technology, like a knock and some of these other companies have built, and of course Yardi with their IQ, and then anyone home, and what they're delivering. So I understand why we're talking about this and why we're going to keep talking about this. But my feeling, and I don't know if this is contrarian, so you can tell me whether I'm being contrarian or not. But you started to come around, because I remember you you used to be more than willing, and I know you still will talk about it, but you have started to get fatigued. So you have to own up to that yourself. Over the last year, you have not wanted to get into this conversation. And so that's probably why it hasn't been on our podcast. But I find it impossible to solve this. And I think Google obviously would be the one to, and if you do everything through Google and you have the floodlight tag, so I don't know how weedsy you want to get on this. Theoretically, you can provide it a pretty good, you can identify the crumbs, like the breadcrumbs, and trace it all back and all that stuff. My issue is that, and I said this, and of course nobody responded because I was probably coming off as negative at the end, but it was at the end, is if I go search for an apartment today, and I go through the process, and then you were to watch me after I renewed or didn't renew a year later, and I went through the process again, it is not going to be the same. If you just tracked me, if you had full tracking on Reid Wyckoff, and you were like, he went to Facebook, then he went to apartments.com, then he went to Google, he came to Craigslist, went back to Google, etc. And it was like, there's my fingerprint, right? And it's like, let's keep building on that. I promise you, if you tracked me 12 months from now, it would not be the same. And so hopefully it's clear why that's a problem. That and I don't know that everybody agrees or understands that, but I think a week after, you'd see different habits. And so you're talking about with small budgets, that's another problem here. With people shuffling in and out, you're trying to solve for what should be weighted what, and how does the journey really work. I think you can get to a directional point, and I'm just telling you, I feel like we're already there. Directionally, we know what that journey looks like. Don't cause yourself any more brain damage than you need to try to solve it like perfectly. That's what people keep talking about. They're looking for a silver bullet that doesn't exist. They want that exact, layout of the journey and where the media should go to support that. And the other thing that didn't come up in the MTA that Lurch always talks about is the weighting. I didn't hear that, but and what does assisted attribution look like? So how much weight are you going to give to the fact that they hit Facebook 3 times? What percentage, so because we just talked about connected TV. So what? I saw one ad and I came in, I spent hours, before I came into that apartment. And I was served one impression, or you caught me viewing one impression, and now you think connected TV is part of the customer journey and should be part of your media mix. And I'm exaggerating the point deliberately, but I just think that that's ridiculous. I I do believe in reach and frequency, so I think that's what you should try to focus on. And the data helps us do that, where it's like, where's my best chance at getting my property in front of them so that I can help create awareness and not just be victim to the ILSs and paid search, where it's like, now this is more bottom of the funnel. I'm in a huge crowd. I'm in an auction-based environment with Google, and I'm with every freaking competitor that is in my market on an ILS. So that kind of sucks. But we all know that's where the overwhelming majority of the conversions happen. But all this other stuff that people are trying to understand and solve for, I think is ridiculous. I think it's a fucking Rubik's Cube that will never be solved because of what I just said.
Well, I do agree with most of what you said. I think the issue is, I don't know that people would, if the silver bullet existed, that they would change their media mix because they think CTV is number 2 in the journey. But what the problem is right now, none of this stuff flows back into their lead management system or CRM. So what they see is only the last click problem. They don't see anything before that. So really, I think what the industry's issue and desire is to have some more of those, like, let's connect multiple sources to somebody, so that if I do try CTV and I see it nobody ever touches it, well, then I can kill it, right? But the problem is, since they can't, they're left with nothing, and they're like, I don't know if it did anything or not, because CTV was never the last click, right? So I think the problem is they need some leap forward where these CRMs can start to take at least some of the other sources to even do the directional thing you're talking about. They don't do the directional thing that you're talking about now, because they don't have any clean, like, repository, like, playground of all this stuff to even look at it.
Well, let me ask you this though, why is Google Analytics not that repository? Why does it matter whether they started with Facebook, and they're not starting with Facebook, but that they first saw an impression on Facebook, then they heard a spot on Spotify, then they got an email blast from you, and then they started searching, and then they went to an ILS, then they did this, then they came back. Why not look at and using your UTMs and Google Analytics, say, this is the portion, like, look at your traffic sources, look at your referral, look at your direct traffic, match your ebbs and flows with like occupancy, etc. I mean, I've been, on this, preaching this for a while, but that's your best chance. It's the cleanest shot you got at, like, saying, in this market for this asset, this is where we need to be spending our media, and our time, because the audience has told us that. And I don't care what order this all happened in. What I know is we're seeing a lot of conversions, as we'd expect, with ILS and PPC. And then it's interesting because we're seeing, this, from Facebook, and we did test the Spotify campaign and we saw this. So proportionally, like, is that making sense? Back to a directional, like, strategy. And that's the extent of the time I would put on it. And that, by the way, is not a small amount of time. So I don't want to act
Mhm.
like you go into Google Analytics and 10 minutes later you have it figured out. It takes commitment, it takes time, and I think it takes some pretty talented analysts, or blend of analyst and machine learning. But I still think that that's the answer. Not getting the CRMs to, like, suddenly, like, have the capacity to, like, make it all happen. It's like, it's right underneath your nose, with your website traffic.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna put a pin in this because I feel like this is an entire episode on its own. So we should get Lurch or Manny or somebody in for us to harangue about the topic, because I do have more to say. The main thing with the analytics is the view through is where that falls short. So on these other sources, like, the view through is the problem, or the like pushing walk-ins there. That's pretty challenging to do, but the view through is definitely. So let's make that. We'll get that done this quarter. But we'll grab a guest, and then we'll just. I love the passion. I haven't heard you passionate like this in a while on the podcast. So we got to get one of these so you can just light up the mic.
Go go off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I got to get out of here, Reid. But thanks for the recap. It was fun, and I do think it was worth it. And I'm looking forward to the next AIM.
Yeah, me too. And we'll have, in a way, a part 2, part 3, part 4 to this, probably, meaning that we did make a couple of nice connections as a result of the AIM Reconnect, which obviously was the point. And I look forward to hopefully getting the folks from Dwellsy and maybe even getting Trevor back on, even though we've talked to Robert. But anyways, I know that there's some more guests that would be excited to bring on as a result of that first AIM.
100%. All right, all. Well, we'll catch you next time.
All right. See you.